Victory and Glory, Napoleon. This is a huge game, as you can see from the box, and with very high production values. The box already looks stunning, and as you will see, everything in it also looks great. This is a very ambitious game from the point of view of gameplay. It is a card-driven game that attempts to portray all of the Napoleonic Wars in a playable format, in a very simple, very intuitive, straightforward manner, and in a manner that can be played within a single evening. Heck, actually, you can easily play the game twice in an evening, maybe 3 times if you have a very long game night. That is, we're under the 2 hours, depending, of course, on how much analysis paralysis you are facing, but that shouldn't be too bad. Very challenging idea, very interesting and promising idea, of course, if it works. Let's take a closer look at the game, see how it works, and then we'll talk about my general impressions and feelings about the game at the end of this video. Let's start by having a look at the components and look at this truly majestic mounted board. It is huge, and in fact it is basically 3 boards that you place next to one another. It is beautiful, it is a period feel, it is very practical, just super nice. It represents the various countries where the players will try to increase their influence. Here you have a track that you will use to record your shifting values in victory points, economy, and leadership and training. Then what do we have? Then we have cards. This is a card-driven game. You have 3 decks of cards there. Basically, the game lasts 9 rounds, 3 rounds for each era, and each era is represented by a deck. So you will draw 3 times from that deck in the first 3 rounds. That completes the first era. That is when you score and you resolve campaigns. Then you will have 3 rounds, drawing 3 times from that deck. 3 more rounds, and then the game is over. So 9 rounds, 3 rounds for each era. Each era has its own deck. We have wooden cubes that represent influence, and then we have a very large number, or a pretty large number, of counters. They are thick and sturdy, and they look very neat, graphically speaking, and they represent the various countries that players will interact with. They will try to recruit units from, and after a while, as players make alliances and grab units from right and left in Europe, the board will look a little bit chaotic, but in a good way. It will really represent the sense of turmoil of the war as everybody is mobilizing to respond to the mess that it's happening. So, very nice. And again, nice thick counters. Very, very good component-wise. Then you have some components that are for optional rules. I'm not sure that they are going to be included in all versions. I think this is that I have is the deluxe version. You have 3 maps because one of the options is to resolve the campaigns by using a miniature game. So basically you can use this game as its own game, and you will play cards to add units to the board, and then after a while the units that have been piled up in a certain country will fight, and you resolve that fight. You can resolve it within the game as is by using a very simple procedure, or at that point you can set up a miniature battle simply using the number of infantry, of cavalry, of guns that have been placed there. So basically it can become a miniature war game of which the cards and the map will let you organize the campaign aspect. Or you can use this for other campaign games, for other miniature games, or you can just frame them because they look great. Another optional element is this wooden miniatures. So instead of having a counter that tells you, that identifies a British ship or a French ship, or different types of infantry, of cavalry, then you can use these miniatures instead. They look Very nice and very neat. I believe there is a number of deluxe copies that have this upgrade here. Overall, very good components. No, actually, pretty great components. At the beginning of each round, each player receives 10 cards from the current deck, and then players will alternate playing cards and pretty much doing what the card says. After each player has played 6 cards, the round is over. Now, when you play a card and you apply the effect, the card is removed from the game. At the end of the round, the cards that you still have in your hand are discarded in the discard pile. That is because if then later, when you draw cards again and then again, if you don't have enough, then you take the discard pile, now the cards that are being eliminated, and you shuffle them to form the deck. So there are some cards that you will see only once because they're played and then removed. The cards that maybe you'll see twice because you discard them and they come back later. Most cards have 2 things that they let you do, or 2 things that you choose from, because you play a card only for one effect. As you can see, most cards have a main effect and a secondary effect. The main effect applies to the player described in the text, and the other effect applies to the player that played that card. That means that if I am saying playing this card, and I'm the French player, I'll probably want to use this one. If I'm the British player, I don't want to give 3 leadership to the French player, then I activate this one and I'll still get 1. So you choose which one, but basically you can choose this one only if you're playing the card and you are the named player in the card. And the cards will adjust your rating in leadership that is used when you resolve combat. Will change your economy. Simply add points to your economy total, or remove points if the game effects or remove things, and that will be important at the end of the round, at the end of the era, when you score the military, your economy, and the influence in various countries. Yes, also cards will let you add influence. For example, here the French player gains 3 influence in France, and then simply the French player places these cubes here in the corresponding location. Of course, the French player uses the blue ones, and the red player, I had an effect, let me put 3 British influence there, and then later the French places 2, and so on and so forth. So after a while the board may look a little bit like this because of the influence that changes, increases, game effects will add to it, will remove it, etc, etc. Also, some cards will give you military units, in which case you simply take them from the general pool, which is pretty much where you saw them earlier next to the board, and you place them in front of you. Now those are units that you can actually use. And the card will tell in most cases which nationality they are. In some cases, to be able to gain units, you need to have the majority of influence in that country. So after a while, you start with your troops. Again, these wouldn't be on the board normally, they would be in your personal play area, but you're piling up units. Maybe the French was able to pick up some Italian units, stuff like that. And the other player and the British player will also have units, maybe even a more colorful coalition with some Russians, so with the British, of course, maybe with the Germans, and so on and so forth. With the Austrians, you really need them, etc, etc. So these are in front of you. Basically, you use game effects to take them from the general supply and make them available to you in front of you, but then you want to play them, and to play them you start a campaign. This is a kind of card that is a special one. When you play it, it is not removed from the game. You play it, you resolve it, and then you give it to the other player that places it in front of themselves, and then they can play too. As you can see from the symbol here, the card can go back and forth. So the player that received in a later round plays it, then it goes back here. So it changes hands every time that it is played. When you start the campaign, well, you play the card there, and that is where you start the campaign. When a campaign is started, each player selects some of their units and places them in the place indicated on the card face down, and this is done simultaneously. So suppose that this is what happens here. There are also naval units, and naval units you can use only in some campaigns. In naval campaigns, well, that is actually all that you can use. Then also there are restrictions about Spain, so you cannot bring the Russians in Spain. Just only certain units may participate to that struggle. And so both players place their units in the place indicated by the campaign. Then the players reveal what they have, and it is convenient, I found, to sort them by type. That is guns, cavalry, and infantry. Because you want to have a sense of what the players have there. However, once these are revealed, the campaign is not resolved yet. We're building up to a great, exciting finish. So I play the card, goes to my opponent. Next time, if the opponent at some point decides to play it, then the same happens again. That is, both players can reinforce the situation. That is pretty much, the card allows you to reinforce a situation, and then you're giving the card to the opponent that then may choose to activate it to reinforce a campaign further. This is really not a battle, though it's called a battle. It's a long cluster of events, and players can send in units multiple times. Oh, well, this is pretty much the basic idea, really. Try to get as much influence as possible, as much economy as possible, and as much military power as possible. Sounds easy, right? Try to be strong everywhere. And since, of course, that is impossible, well, then you will have to prioritize. You continue like this, drawing cards, discarding, getting a new hand, until the age of an era, which is the third after 3 rounds, and then and then the 6th and the 9th. Then we finally score, which is we resolve the military campaigns. First, we add together simply the sheer military power. So France here has 4, plus 2, 6, plus 2 is 8. Plus, we add the leadership and training factor, which you may remember we keep track of on this track here, and goes up and down depending on whatever game effects we have. So we add the leadership and training to the sheer military power, and then we add a bonus for combined armies. That is, for each type of unit you have a +1. So here, for example, then we add a +1 for guns, for artillery, +1 because we have cavalry, and +1 because we have infantry. And so there will be a +3 for the bonus. The ally player gets, well, the total here plus the leadership, and as for combined units, then also it is a +3. There is no infantry there, which is just sad. Come on, Britain, bring in an infantry. Hooray, now they have a combined bonus of +4. The player, if there's a tie, nothing happens. If a player wins, of course, that would be the player with the majority, with the total of sheer strength, combined bonus, plus leadership and training. The player gains the advantage indicated here, victory points and influence. The opponent sometimes will get a penalty, but sometimes actually will learn from the experience. It's a nice balancing mechanism. We'll learn from the loss, and will gain leadership or will gain other things. After you resolve that, the winner loses their lowest value piece. Say, suppose if here Britain lost, they could choose to lose one of these because it's a 2. And no, wait a second, what I was talking about. The winner loses their lowest value, and yes, and the loser loses their highest value piece. The pieces go back home, that is in front of the player, they can be redeployed next campaign, and this is the general idea. Something very important, there are cards in the decks that will allow you to resolve a campaign, not at the end of a turn, not at the end of an era, but when you play the card. So you're setting up a situation and the opponent thinks they're going to have a couple of rounds to add to it, and maybe boom, you push at that point and you resolve it earlier. So it's an interesting element of uncertainty there. After you score all the military and you send the surviving units home, you check the economy. If your economy is higher than the number of national units that you have, then you get a bonus, and the bonus is the difference between the economy and the number of national units. National units means British for the Allied player and French for the French player, means not counting the allies. So if the economy is higher, you get a bonus. Say the Brits have 6 units and the economy is 8, they gain 2 points. But if the economy is 8 and they have more units, then they get a penalty, and the penalty is the difference, subtracting whichever is lower from whichever is higher. So economy is higher than your units, you get a bonus. Units, you have more than your economy, you get a penalty. Finally, at the end of each era, you score the influence in each country. And there are 3 eras and the influence changes. Pretty much that means that at the end of the first era, whoever has the influence, the majority of influence in a country scores that number. Whoever has the most influence there at the end of the second era scores the second number. And of course, majority at the end of the third era scores the third number. Very interesting. Look at France and Britain. They are not worth much at the beginning of the game, but if by the end of the Napoleonic Wars you have influence there, that is pretty much you retain control of your own homeland, that is worth a lot of points. As for other things, they change. The values tend to increase with some exceptions. Austria goes up and then down again. We have here in a corner, easy to forget about it, poor Egypt, whose value goes down with time. So very interesting idea, very interesting mechanism. Score victory points. Continue like this. At the end of the third era, the player with the highest amount of victory points is the winner of the game. Impressed. I'm really impressed by this game. Wow, this to me is really, really good stuff because it is playable. Hooray! Right there. It has a lot of good things. So card-driven games in a playable format. There are some card-driven games out there, such as Empire of the Sun or For the People, which are great, mind you, but sometimes they are something between a lifestyle and a religion almost. That's how much you have to work, how much you have to commit to them to be able to play them and enjoy them. Here you have the beauty of card driven, which is the randomness and yet a sense of structure and challenges that come from hand managing that really give you the sense of resources and opportunities that come and go. That nice balance that you have between the randomness of the cards that you get and the degree of control of influence that you have is right there. So I like card-driven games, and I like the fact that here we have one that is very, very playable, very simple, very intuitive. Play the darn card and do what it says. That's simple. However, there are so many things that you need to do. It is great to pile up units on the board and smash the opponent, but then if you do that and you do not have the economy to support those, then you're going to pay dearly at the end of the era. Then I'm going to do a lot of economy and I have a strong military. Yes, but the opponent is placing a lot of influence everywhere. So you have a lot of things to do and a lot of nice options. A hand of 10 cards lets you do a lot, and yet not everything, because you're getting 10, not every card, so not all options are available to you. So there is a random range of opportunity there. Within that, you have a huge landscape of objectives that you're trying to achieve, and a fairly large, very satisfying range of things that you can attempt to do. And it really is an exercise in Zen balance, or slightly upsetting the balance, tilting the balance in your direction. Because of course, if you have a huge amount of units in one campaign and you're losing 3 other campaigns, that is not good. If you have a ton of influence in one country and you're winning the influence challenge there by 20 points and then you're losing it everywhere else, then again, it doesn't work. So it's all about having a little bit of advantage, just enough advantage everywhere. And I like that a lot. I like games where the scoring is based on majority, because it just makes things so fluid and creates a synergy in which everything that I am attempting to do depends on what you are doing. The number of cubes that I need to have there, the number of units and the type of units that I need to have there to win depends entirely on what you have there. In that sense, the game reminds me of a much smaller game, but it's a game that I love. It's just one of my favorite games, Dynasties. Very simple. It's also card driven. It is also about influence, placing cubes, etc., etc. Dynasties is simpler, much more portable, and clearly the production values are not even close to those of this big beast here. But basically it is a game that gives me that amount of challenge that I want, that type of interaction, and it really feels that it is a war game, and it is an historical war game. It has enough historical feel there that makes it worth it, and gives me the sense, in fact, that I am playing a game about the Napoleonic Wars. Is an abstract representation, but overall, from a bird's eye view, it really works, because you have the challenges of France coming out very strong at the beginning. No one really knows what to do. The British player is definitely scrambling around Europe, trying to convince people to join them against Napoleon, and they're like, I don't know, maybe. And then finally you're gaining momentum. Towards the end, France has lost momentum, and then the last deck is particularly punishing. You can see the French Empire eroding. And then you have the different theaters of operation. Egypt, which is interesting at the beginning. Spain, that comes out later. You have the Russian campaign. It is, to me, almost amazing how something that's this simple, play a card and do what it says, really still gives you not just a lot of interesting gameplay challenges, but a feel for the historical events. Dynasties I like, but it is much more abstract in the mechanics and in the theme. It represents in a very general sense, Sun Tzu's military philosophy. Here you have those mechanical elements that are interesting, and the theme really shines through those. In that sense, because of the effect that it gives me, it reminds me of Quartermaster General, another game that I like a lot, that also is card-driven, very simple, and a lot of work has been doing in hardwiring the theme into the cards, so you don't have to worry about following a lot of rules, because there, by simply playing the cards that the game allows you to have, you are following historical patterns, with, again, a little bit of variety. Otherwise it's a simulation, it's not a game. Victory and Glory Napoleon gives me the same impression. That is, again, very simple, very bird's eye view, but I do have a sense of the flow of history. The title is promising because not just Napoleon does this. Victory and Glory Napoleon makes me hope there will be other Victory and Glory games. Maybe we'll finally have a Victory and Glory Gustav Adolf. I'm still hoping for a game of this type about the 30 Years' War, a game that is super simple, super intuitive, approachable. I can play the entire war twice or 3 times in an evening, because I think that's a very interesting period historically, and I don't think we have enough games about those, and the ones that we have are sometimes very challenging. For a war gamer, those are okay, but it's hard to introduce other people. Victory and Glory, other things. I hope the Victory and Glory is not just the title of this game, but it is the name of a system, the name of a line of games that I hope will be long and healthy, because I had a blast playing Victory and Glory. Just so nice looking. The pleasure of manipulating the components is intense already, but the pleasure of working through the mechanics of the game, devising a strategy, interacting, seeing the different moving parts of the design, that pleasure is much higher still. Victory and Glory Napoleon. It is an excellent game, most likely one of my favorite games of 2018 so far.